Welcome to a Legendarium special about the medieval apocalypse of 536 to 541 AD. We will talk about how the KRAKATOA eruption led to a darkened sun, which triggered a famine and indirectly led to the Justinian plague, which caused an immense catastrophe in Constantinople, but the effects of the plague were felt throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa. Around the year 536 AD, just 2 generations after the collapse of the West Roman Empire, the volcano of Krakatoa, located on an island between Java and Sumatra in Indonesia, erupted. The Book of Kings in Java recorded that the earth shook and that the sky darkened from the eruption. Men heard the sound of the volcano 3,000 miles away in South Asia. The force of the explosion was tens, if not hundreds of times greater than any other recorded volcanic explosion. It would have blown with the force of over 2 million Hiroshimas. Indeed, the end result was the natural equivalent of nuclear winter. Thousands of cubic miles of sulfuric ash and dust blanketed the earth, blowing up in a 30-mile-high mushroom-shaped cloud. For about 18 months in 536 and 537, a thick, persistent veil of dust darkened the sky in Europe and Asia. Thick bluish fog extended as far east as China, where summer frost and snow wreaked havoc upon crops. In Southwest Asia, the snowfalls became so severe that the birds died from the cold. Josephus of Ephesus, who lived in Italy at the time, wrote, "For the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse." Some areas even reported a phenomenon that we today call acid rain, with dark red precipitation falling in some parts of Europe. South China reported clouds of yellow dust floating in the air and falling on the ground in such amounts that men could scoop it up with their hands. From Siberia to the Americas, the dust veil stunted tree growth for the next 10 years. Michael the Syrian wrote, "The sun became dark, and its darkness lasted for 1.5 years. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow. The fruits did not ripen, and the wine tasted like sour grapes." For any society dependent on agriculture, the effect was disastrous. During 2 years of bitter and extended cold, few, if any, crops could have grown. One can easily imagine scenes of famine unfolding worldwide. Desperate men would have turned to hunting and fishing, yet the numbers sustained by agriculture simply could not survive as hunter-gatherers. To a society already sickened and weakened by the famine, the plague was especially devastating. The so-called Justinian plague came to Constantinople via the old Roman trade route down the Red Sea to East Africa. Mariners brought the disease back first to North Africa, then Constantinople. Already weakened by famine, humanity proved all too susceptible to this new illness, a bacterium carried on rats. When it came to Constantinople, plague victims first reported a mild fever. Then swellings began to appear on the face, which gradually turned into black blisters. Some patients grew lethargic, slipped into a coma, and died. Others went into extreme agitation, growing paranoid and frantic, almost impossible to care for. One who caught the Justinian plague often died within a few days. Constantinople, a city home to 1 million people, saw 5,000 persons die each day. Since the plague acted so fast, people took to wearing name tags around their arms so their bodies could be identified if they didn't come home. So many died that they couldn't be buried. Officials locked them up in high towers, buried them in trenches, and even sent them into death boats to be thrown into the sea, and those bodies only wound up washing up on the shores around Constantinople. Many others simply lay rotting in the streets. With medical science unable to explain the Justinian plague, people turned to superstition. Romans came to believe that a demon or evil spirit caused the plague. People believed that it appeared to you in a dream or revealed itself to you as you woke up. And once a person laid eyes upon the plague demon, they contracted the illness. To prevent the plague demon from entering their houses, people barred their doors and refused all visitors. No one was allowed in, not even family members. All too often, this approach simply meant that people died alone. Others turned to priests who tried to remove plague demons from the afflicted with exorcism. Still others believed that monks were actually devils in disguise who spread the plague, and people began to flee from tonsured monks. As people tried to flee plague-ridden Constantinople, they only spread the disease to the countryside of Eastern Europe and Asia Minor. From there, East Roman trade routes and refugees brought the disease across Europe. About 100 million people in Europe, Asia, and Africa died of the Justinian plague. At least another 50 million died in the famine before it. Taken together, as much as 1/3 of humanity perished in the wake of the KRAKATOA eruption and the Justinian plague. In Scandinavia, the northern tier of European agriculture, some communities lost 90% of their population. Deserted villages inhabited only by starving dogs remained in its wake. Trade within the East Roman Empire came to a complete standstill as crops rotted in the fields because there were no farmers left to harvest them. Needless to say, this disaster also had political consequences. The northern and southern dynasties in China collapsed around this time, later replaced by the Sui dynasty. Justinian, who had been well on his way to rebuilding the old Roman Empire from Constantinople, found his plans hopelessly stalled. Yet the plague also affected faraway Britain. The population of Britain, close to 3 million in 500 AD, declined to a little over 1 million by 600 AD. Land went vacant, there were fewer men left to defend it, and the new Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in the east of the island began a new campaign that ultimately drove the Romanized Britons to the fringes of the island. Indeed, it is striking that King Arthur, the legendary defender of Roman Britain, is said to have died around the time of the Krakatoa eruption. And that wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.